Welcome today. Thank you so much for joining me, Andrew. So, today we're joined by Andrew Hood, and he's going to be telling us all about his books and how he's going to be inspiring us at the Writers' Festival. How's your day been, Andrew?
It's been pretty good. It's been a busy day, but I've been excited to spend some time with you tonight. So I've been looking forward to it all day. Thanks, Rhiannon. Thanks
I,
for having
I
me.
absolutely love doing these interviews. They're so much fun, and I love getting to know all the authors that come through the festival. So, tell me a bit
Absolutely.
about your books.
Yes, I have two books out already. It's a trilogy, but they're all self-contained. My first book was called The Man Who Corrupted Heaven.
Oh,
Yeah, it's been a great book, but not without its controversies. I upset some people using the word heaven in the title, but that's okay. And my second book was called The Man Who Settled the Score, and that came out just earlier this year in February. And the last of that trilogy, or the third book, is called The Woman Who Stole the World, and that comes out in October.
oh, that sounds
Don't
great.
find the festival, which is such a shame, but it'll be out soon after the festival, so
Well,
that's okay.
hopefully you'll be able to get a bunch of pre-orders when you're at the festival.
But nice. Yeah, great.
So what are they about? What genre are you writing in?
It's funny because my books are there. Three books in a series in the trilogy, but they're all written very differently, and they're different books. So, but they are effectively of three characters, or three characters that are all intertwined. They're three children that meet at an orphanage when they're very, very young, and they are mistreated badly. And it is about the people that they grow up to become, and they're very different
Mm.
people, but the way that they then cope throughout their lives with, what they went through, what they experienced, and how they then deal with that. So, the first book is one of those characters. Each book is another character out of those three. And the first book is called The Man Who Corrupted Heaven because it's about a rich man. He had nothing as a child, and then he spent his life just trying to collect money or to be rich. And then he decides that when he dies, he wants to take that money with him to heaven because he doesn't want to let death steal it from him. So I came up with this concept of that I was literally just driving down the road, and somebody on the radio said, "When you die, you can't take anything with you." And I
Mm.
pulled over and I thought, why not? And what would I take if I wanted to take something to heaven with me? What would I take? And then I was like, how would I take it? And I sort of came up with this idea that a rich man might want to take his money with him. That's what was so important to him. So that's where that book came from, and it's about that man. And I'm not giving anything away because he dies literally in the first one or two chapters, and that it's coming. So, but I guess it's about his life flashing before his eyes, and the mistakes that he made along the way.
Oh, fascinating. It sounds very reflective. And you
Yeah,
know what? What kind of message goes behind that for you? Is it one of, well, are you going to defy the laws of nature and take things with you when you're told you shouldn't? Or is it more what really matters to the human soul and the human condition?
yeah, and I think it's the second one because I write in the end of the book. I have a little bit of an interview with me, which somebody did, which was great. And I say it's about perspective because if you think back on in that book, some of the things that he thought about in his life, if you look at it from just a slightly different perspective, left or right, how he remembers them and how they really were very, very different, right? But a child
Mm.
sees something and it reacts to it, and you can spend your whole life reacting to that one event, and then one day realize that event is actually didn't play out the way you thought it did. So it was really him having a perspective on his life after death, I guess.
Oh,
Um,
that is brilliant. I absolutely love that sort of thing because we there's really no truth that we know specifically because the truth is completely objective. We see the
yeah,
world through our filters. And to have
yeah,
an unreliable narrator is one of my favorite things to play with.
absolutely. And my father came to Australia as an orphan, so he used to tell us, or he still tells me that I had nothing, and they used to say to the kids the reason you're here is because nobody loves you. And they used to
Oh,
say that to the children because they didn't want the children to have these romantic notions that somebody was coming to save them. They wanted them to deal with the realities of their situation. So I grew up with these stories from Dad, who just, appreciates everything around him. He appreciates his family, and but yeah, he told us these stories, and it just sort of stuck in my heart, I guess. When you hear that, and you sort of go, imagine not having anything, and that's what these characters say. We came from nothing, and they
yeah.
mean nothing, as in no family. So it's yeah, it was a really it took me 5 years to write that first book, and it was exhausting because I don't like to do things by halves. So if I'm going to do something, it has to be like, I was looking at books on the shelves of some of my favorite authors, and I was like, it has to stand next to them or I'm going to be embarrassed. Like, it has to be world class. I'm not saying it was, but that's what I was aiming for. Um, and it took 5 years. It was exhausting. The second book certainly didn't take that long. Um,
The first book is always it's like giving birth, and then the second book it's like, oh, I know what's happening now. This is much easier.
well, it was, and I think because in that 5 years nobody read it, right? So it was something that I kept to myself, and you just don't know if
Mm.
eventually when you give it, because I can't give it to any of my work to someone until it's done and been edited once or twice, so it's okay. Um, you just don't really know if they're going to read it after 5 years and go, this is terrible, or you just don't know. And I remember, I showed my wife, I always go to my wife and my mother and a friend of mine, Freddie. So I have the two women that I care about and a good friend. So there's a male reading it as well. And I just sort of sat back, and I think they're a bit stunned. It was like, oh wow, this is completely not what we were expecting. But I tried to put so many ideas into that book, and so much of my own philosophy and things that I've learned over the years, that I'm really proud of it. Super proud of that book.
It's powerful stuff. And it takes a lot of strength to be able to put something in it that really is from the soul. It really is from you
Yeah.
as a being. So
Yeah,
congratulations.
thank you. And I got it out, and then I got a Miles Franklin nomination, which was lovely,
Oh,
and
wow.
his nomination, which was nice. All of a sudden, I went from trying to thrash this book out to being nominated for awards and things. It was very, very exciting. Very
Your,
exciting.
your hard work paid off. That's
It
fantastic.
did. It did. But I did, like I said before, I did cop a bit along the way because I actually sell a lot of books in the US, probably more than I do in Australia,
A
which
lot
is
of people
strange.
do.
Yeah, yeah, right. Okay, so I'm not alone. But
No, not even. No, the US are voracious readers
yeah,
for a nation where so many people still can't read.
mm,
Their readers over there, they're just
right.
they cannot get
Yeah,
enough of it.
yeah, yeah. Well, which is great, which is wonderful. And I was getting nice messages, maybe once a week, or I'd get somebody say, "Hey, this is my new favorite book of all time," or something. I would
Oh,
get really
wonderful.
lovely messages, which is just wonderful. But I'd also I get some really angry messages from people who haven't read the book, and I really was trying to be careful not to make it I'm not, I don't go to church or any of that, but I believe in some sort of heaven. I don't know what, but I believe in something. So I really didn't want to upset any Christians or Muslims, so I really went to great lengths to almost take religion out of the book. There's no religion in the book because
Yeah.
I don't know a lot of religion. So I really just, the heaven I have in the book is almost like a democracy, right? Nobody really knows what anybody else is doing. Everybody's sort of walking around trying to figure things out. So, um, but because I use the word heaven in the title and the man who corrupted heaven, I got a lot of very angry Christian emails, people calling me all sorts of names and saying all sorts of terrible things. Um, and my first publisher was a Christian publisher, and they said, "Oh, we don't care. Don't worry about it." I liked the book because it had the word heaven in the title. I didn't even really care what it was about, but uh,
It, It's interesting that you say that because we've recently found out that the the biggest publisher in Germany uh, for spicier materials, so with
Yeah,
looking at, romance and
yeah, yeah.
borderline, if not pornography, is the Vatican. It's a publisher
Wow.
owned by the Vatican.
Hey, man,
Uh,
they make
so and they got angry letters back to them saying you better shut this down, and they're like, no.
that's
Oh, so people can always get on a high horse about literacy. They can, or literature, they can always get on a high horse about different forms of art. And I think that just shows more about them than it does about you. It
absolutely.
shows that where they feel vulnerable or where they feel like they need to defend something. And sometimes that's just because they want something to defend. They want to be a knight to something. They want to feel special or important or powerful, and they think that if they blast off at someone else, then that will give them that. So it's all of these, everyone else's reaction is always about them rather than you.
Absolutely. And it was funny actually because the people that really liked my book would then get into arguments with the people that didn't, and it was causing quite a stir. It was one. It was a Facebook ad I had, which was really doing well. I was selling a lot of books, but I had to shut it down because it just, um, just erupted into this war of, you know, uh, people that liked my books to people that really disliked me because of the title, and I just sort of didn't want that sort of aggro happening in my name, and that's what was
Mm.
happening. So I had to shut it down. But um, yeah, that's sort of quietened down a bit now. I think anybody that was going to have a say has probably had their say, and so now and now I typically just get really nice messages
Oh,
about that.
good.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's all about the energy you put out as well. So if you're going to put out a very defensive energy, you're going to get very hostile answers. Whereas when
Yeah,
you put out a, yeah, you know what, I don't want to own that. I don't want to take on that aggression. Then
yeah,
eventually it peters out because you're not feeding them. The rule
that's
number
it.
one: don't feed the trolls.
That's right. That's right. And I never try. I think in the start, I would say something like, well, I have a lot of good, great Christian friends who love this book, and but then in the end, I just didn't, I just liked their comment. Just to say, I acknowledge I've read your
Yep,
comment, but, I'm not going to respond to it. But that's
beautiful.
okay. Um, and then I brought out book two, which was different again. So that was the second character of the three. That was called The Man Who Settled the Score, and that was so it was about like the first guy was about money and all about money. Was this guy was a brute, right? He would just hit people, and his rich brother would say, "Hey, go and hurt that guy because he owes us money," and he would just go and do it, and he would never ask. So then it became a story of how do you tell the story of a baddie? Like how do you get the audience to fall in love with a character that's really not a very nice character, And
Mm.
the one that I was funny because I was looking for a format of how I was going to tell that story, and I read they've got a list of the top 10 works of literature of all time or something like that. One of those sort of lists that you see on Facebook, and there was a book on there called Lolita, and
Oh,
it's
yes.
yeah, so well written, right? And you know the guy's wrong, like the pedophile, but you find yourself in this situation where you go, oh, I almost hope he's going to get out of this. Like you just end up sort of feeling for that character, and he explains himself. And so I sort of stole that method of like a confession. And this
Mm.
book is a confession. And he often says to you, the reader, do you hate me yet? Do you hate me yet? He's almost daring the reader to hate him because he wants you to, but you just can't help yourself, and you sort of feel for this guy because you understand everything he went through,
Yeah.
so um,
Yeah.
that was
It's
really
very
interesting.
similar to Dexter. Jeff Lindsay and his character Dexter, the serial killer who kills serial killers.
Right. There you go. I think I saw one episode of that, but it did look very intriguing in the show for sure.
The books are much darker than the TV show. It was very
Oh,
interesting.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
And
No,
Hannibal
well,
Lecter is always another popular one. Scarface as well.
Yeah.
So there's an array of characters that
Mm,
you're not meant to like, you're not meant to
mm,
empathize with because they are outlandishly cruel or portray what we'd call evil. And yet, like, you got people like
they're
Chopper Reed
intriguing.
in real life, and people, they really kind of celebrate his story.
I know, it's lovely. Somebody used the term a beautifully dark novel of self-discovery. And I really like
Oh,
that because that's how
that's
my books
good.
are. They're quite dark. Well, for those first two anyway, but they are self-discovery. So, it's that sort of stuff. But then when book three came around, to be honest, I was a bit over the dark stuff. I wanted to write something fun and entertaining. So I wrote the third book, which is The Woman That Stole the World, and that
Beautiful.
comes out. Can't wait for that to come out. Then people can see a lighter side of me as well.
Oh, that's so good. You know what? I have to agree with you on that. There is a lot of darkness, and there's so
Mm,
much being written and publicized, and there's not just in the real world, but also in fiction. Look at things like Black Mirror, Game of
yeah.
Thrones. All of it is quite dark, and then dystopian novels have just exploded.
Mm,
And it really makes you wonder, like, sometimes doing a light thing and then putting something into it that makes it more dramatic can
yeah.
be more effective than just going, oh, look at this completely dark, grotty, disgusting land, because it loses its effect. It's like, oh, well, I guess everything is like that. Like it may as well, you may as well be looking into a sewer. And then if you put
Yeah.
more crap in there, it's not going to make any difference. But if you've got a
Mm,
field of meadows, or a field of meadows, if you've got a meadow of flowers,
mm,
and then you put darkness in there, it stands out a hell of a lot more.
yeah, yeah. And I think for me, writing, I once said, and I don't know if I borrowed this from someone or if it's my own, but I said I often don't know what I'm thinking until I write it down. So
Mm,
these books are ways for me to deal with different subjects. So, that second book was about, what happens to the people, and there was a lot of headlines here in Australia about people that knew about atrocities done to children back in the 50s and 60s, but actually did nothing about it. How are they held accountable? Should they be? Should they not? So book two was sort of like, how are the people? It's called the man who settled the score. How are the people that knew and did nothing? How do they? What price do they pay
mm.
in all of this? But then book three came out, and we had the Me Too movement. So I wrote a book about this third character, this fantastic woman who really stole book one. I don't know where she came from. It was never meant to be that way, but she really, from the start, has been this strong undercurrent character. And I remember thinking, I've got to finish on this character. Um, but then it was a book about her told by men because of this Me Too movement that was happening, and they all get it wrong. Like they make assumptions about her, and so that was a fascinating book for me to write. I really enjoyed that third book. Yeah,
Oh,
as
that
far
sounds fantastic.
mm,
I can't wait to read it when it comes out. That's going to be really exciting.
yeah, thank you.
So,
I'm excited too.
with the Writers' Festival, what is the topic that you will be talking on this year?
So I'm going to be talking about it's called From Secrets to Dreams, and it's really a story about how I overcame anxiety and depression through writing and the journey that I took. And I'll talk a little bit about in my speech. I'll talk about how I was, a young man in the IT industry earning a lot of money and doing well and had my first child. But then just a few things happened to tip my life over the edge. And, we had some miscarriages and money problems and all sorts of things, me and my wife. And my work sort of faded or dried up. So it's quite a story of being in a really, really dark place and having to sort of get out of that place. But in the process that I went through, learned a lot of things. But one of the things I learned was that I would sometimes, I had this saying was I was proud of my secrets. I thought my secrets defined me. And then I went and saw a therapist, and she said, "No, Andrew, there's a saying in our industry, which is you're only as sick as your secrets." So I had to go,
Ooh.
fantastic saying, right? She said, "You're holding all of that in, and that's just making you this powder keg of, because I was trying to do all of these things without my wife finding out because she was pregnant and we'd had miscarriages, and I didn't want her to panic and worry. So I'm trying to hold all these money problems and all of these things.
Oh, yeah.
So massive, massive pressure. And then one day I decided to write about, it was Are You OK Day? And I wrote a blog post about having anxiety and depression. And to that point, nobody in my life knew.
Yeah.
But there was something about that little story, because I don't know if Google found it or something, but all of a sudden it's like hundreds of people had read it, and I sort of came out of nowhere, and I remember my sister calling and saying, "Hey, you better talk to mum. She's upset, like she blames herself."
Oh.
But all of a sudden, I had to
Oh.
deal with all of these situations, but I found out that some family members suffered from the same thing, and so many people I knew suffered, but they did it quietly. They did it in secret. And then I sort of came up with this concept of you could write about one thing in your life that changed you, right? And I started a blog called The Weekly Tipping Point. And it was, what is the tipping point in your life that changed you from that day on? Like, this happened that day, and from that day on, I was this person. And I remember that blog did quite well after I started talking about real stuff. After that, Are You OK Day?
Yeah.
And then I finished and I was telling my friend, the blog hasn't really gone anywhere. And he said, "Well, you've done quite well. You've got a good following." He said, "How many blog posts have you written?" I said, "Oh, a couple of hundred." He said, "Well, that's a book. If you put them all together, that's a book." I
Yeah, it
thought,
is.
oh, it's a book. I might have written a book. So I published it, but the best of it, because there was some junk in there too. But I think I sold 2 copies or something. But that's it. What it taught me was I started to think maybe I could tell the story of somebody's life from just those tipping point moments. And that was that first book, The Man Who Corrupted Heaven. He's seeing his life back, but only the most important moments. And that's how you get to know who he was, from those most important moments. The rest of it's just filler.
Oh, that's amazing.
So if I hadn't gone through that anxiety and that depression, and I hadn't been through that process, and I go into this in a little bit more detail, but I would never have known that life can change in a moment. I would never have known that sometimes your perspective's a bit out,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes that, that I could write a book. So really, it has gone, full. So, and then I was able to, get myself out of financial trouble. We've now got 3 beautiful children. So our life, when I say from secrets to dreams, that's sort of, where I came up with that concept. That's the story I'll
Oh,
be telling.
that's amazing. Oh, it's so powerful too, because so many people, they do suffer in silence, and it is a lot of men that suffer in silence. And when they've got a good circle of other men, they don't have to. So it doesn't always have to be men. They can have female friends, that's fine. But
Yeah,
often, men confiding in men, they feel that kinship and that brotherhood. And
yeah,
it's so important to be able to have a mate that you can chat to, that you can open up to, and that you can confide in about these things. Because you're exactly right. You're only as sick as your secrets.
yeah. And I made this point in the speech, and I'll make it on the day, is that through all of this, I would come to work every day and smile at everybody, just the way
Mhm.
everybody else smiled at everyone, and nobody would ever know. Nobody knows what's going on back here in your mind, and what's happening. So, um, and then I've given this speech once before. I did it on a men's mental health day,
Oh,
and I
beautiful.
didn't know how it would go down, but I there was a lot of crying. There was a lot of crying. I thought maybe I should maybe make this a little bit better, and maybe I can deliver it in a different way and talk about it in a different way. But grown men who were just like, you know what, that was me. It was, it was so
Yeah.
like me. Nobody knew what was going on. I was battling so much, So we have to tell these stories because that's how we'll learn.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much to be said for connectedness and community. And
Absolutely.
that's another reason why we're doing the Writers Festival, because it's lonely to be writers often. And I
Yeah,
noticed that there was such a huge gap between people that loved stories and felt like they had a core story that they needed to get out and tell the world, and the ones that were successful. And
yeah.
there's like a big chasm that we're trying to bridge in Logan with the Writers Festival, so that all writers can come to Logan and know that they can live their dreams, that they can be successful, and that they don't have to do it alone. So thank you so
Well,
much for being part of that, Andrew.
so excited to be part of it. I really am. I've
I'm
been
excited to have you
following
here.
The Logan's Writers Festival on Facebook for 2-3 years now, and I'm like, one day I want to. And then I went to the Sydney Writers Festival, and I had such a great time listening to all the other writers. And I said, I want to go, but I want to speak as well. So I'm
Yes.
so glad that you've allowed me to be part of it. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm so pleased to have you as one of the speakers at the Writers Festival this September. Thank you so much for chatting with me tonight. This has been fantastic. We the only time we could schedule this was in the evening for today. So thank you so much for lending me an hour of your evening, and I look forward to hearing more about your talk when we get to September. And good luck with getting your book ready for launch. Again, super excited about that. Where can people find more of you so they can get hold of the first two books before the third one gets launched?
Yeah, well, they can buy directly from my publisher, Shawline Publishing, on their website, or they can get it off Amazon. It's on Amazon. I even put author signed copies on eBay just as a bit of a test to see if anybody would buy author signed copies on eBay. But I have sold a few. But
Excellent.
yeah, mostly Amazon on my publisher's site.
Awesome. Perfect. We will send people there. Thank you so much
Thank
for joining us, and we'll see everyone in September.